What's up, guys? This is X Benjamin X from DailyRotoSharks.com, and we are here with Brother Cherry, and he has won over $200,000 in DFS so far in this year alone, profit. So we're going to be talking to him, asking him about a little bit of his past and how he got into DFS, and then we'll go straight into strategy and lineup construction and some tips that he has. So Zach, welcome, man.
Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no problem. So we met Zack a couple months back, maybe like half a year, maybe beginning of MLB season, and we were discussing lineups and the sheets and stuff. And then one night, man, he just went nuts and ended up with I think it was like $180,000 win that night.
Yeah, 179. And
Yikes.
That was actually, it was interesting. You asked me about my background. I've always been a big sports fan and even more of a fan of statistical analysis, and it's carried over into my career. Or actually, DFS has been an extension of sort of how I approach investment and all things capital driven. And I wasn't a baseball fan, and I realized that. After NFL season, NBA still plagues me. I mean, I think it's definitely the hardest thing to actually be profitable in. I had a terrible first season in NBA, and it's really a different animal than I think either MLB or NFL. I don't do hockey, but honestly, there's such a huge amount of data around MLB that I was scouring, trying to find good tools for it, because I was getting rave reviews on how much fun DFS was in Major League Baseball. And I happened on, what at the time was a very fledgling Daily RotoSharks site. And the tools that you guys were putting out, I mean, at the time, I honestly probably understood about half the statistics that you guys were modeling. And it became the foundation tool for me in what ended up being a ridiculous and, huge standard deviation first MLB season. I mean, that ended up driving about 230,000 in a month and a half towards the end of the summer.
You guys can see this here. I have his lineup from that night open, and there was a huge win. So while we're looking at this, Zach, you just give us a little background information about what you did for work, maybe some what you did in schooling and stuff, and what eventually brought you into DFS.
Sure. Yeah. So I went to school in Rhode Island. I went to Brown. Majored in business econ. Did a lot of quantitative and qualitative analytics, and then ended up working on Wall Street, sort of at every node of finance for the better part of 20 years, and then went into private equity and venture cap, and ultimately landed in management consulting and design. But the drive towards analytics has been a thread that's sort of run throughout my career, and DFS was a really natural extension of that. I spent a lot of time looking at investments in sort of the middle 10 to 15 years of my career, and quickly realized that the way to drive significant returns is to figure out where the crowd is going and see if you can find a good justification, and I think that's important, to go in another direction. And if you can risk a small amount of money to generate huge outsized returns, that's also a positive dynamic, because when it doesn't work, you lose a little bit, and when it does, you make a lot. And so that's why, GPPs are a natural extension just of my sort of risk orientation and personality. I am not a cash game player. Nothing I'm going to tell you is probably going to be helpful for cash. This is strictly, sort of higher dollar volume GPPs, and even some of the lower dollar volume. But that leads into one of the sort of most important things for me, and that's been contest selection. You can see that the vast majority of sort of the significant profits have come in the higher dollar GPPs. Even that night, that first big night of baseball, 150 of the 179 was from one entry in the 333.
Right.
And then, recently in NBA, was the Monster. It was a bigger version of the Monster on FanDuel. It was $300 that was 75,000 of the 83,000 that I won. It is really, really difficult to take down, these much larger sort of 10,000+
Right.
field GPPs. I mean, you have to hit the stone cold nuts, or you're just not making, you're making good returns, but you're not making a meaningful amount of money. It's not where you're going to hit the, 1 to 200x returns on the capital you're putting up.
That's awesome. So you would say definitely that your previous career had helped you in terms of DFS and analyzing game selection, bankroll management, and things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's critical. And I'm a huge advocate of the higher dollar volume GPPs, so long as it is actually consistent with your bankroll. I think particularly in something as high variance as NFL, which, I was, a total lightning rod for negative variance yesterday. And it didn't even end up mattering. I mean, my lineups ended up just like in the bottom 10% of every GPP I was in. So,
well, like Ricky Bobby said, if you ain't first, you're last.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's an important point because, I'd much rather be dead last than in the middle, because it means that I also had a chance to be at the other end of the tail at the top. It did make me feel better though when, basically my day was over at 112 when Shady and AJ Green were both out. And NFL's been really weird. I think usually I'm pretty good at forecasting ownership, and yesterday was just so weird. I mean, Shady ended up being pretty chalky, which I didn't expect.
Dude, NFL is so tough. It's basically like it's a gamble any night you play, just because of the fact that it doesn't matter what kind of research you do if a backup wide receiver or backup running back comes in and vultures 2 touchdowns and then the defense scores 1. Now the entire game plan you had offensively is just shot.
Yeah.
So you can have guys returning touchdowns for kickoffs for touchdowns and all this other randomness that you really can't anticipate. So it's a lot more high variance than any other sport, in my opinion. And it's hard to analyze the data because you have so few games. So
yeah,
it's tough.
No, that's very true. I mean, the sample size it becomes really problematic. But it's very interesting though. I mean, I could contrast that with NBA, where a lot of sharp guys really look at it as a low variance sport. And for me, when you have your game plan set around, like for instance the Dallas game going big the other night, and a bunch of guys sitting, and they don't even announce it until after lock. I mean, that's it's a huge variance. I mean, like you're taking auto zeros in all those spots. And
the non-late swap is tough.
And you're just in the NBA. I mean, the first time that I've ever seen this, one of the guys who is consistently at the tops of leaderboards, this guy Asani. It's the first time I've ever seen somebody take down a GPP with a 0. I mean, most of the time.
Oh, really?
Most of the time you have to, not only do your monsters have to go off, you have to get your your value plays to hit 6-7 times. And I just find I find it to be really tough. I think one of the cool things about MLB, they do such a good job of getting lineups out. You always know who's going to play, and you know that those guys are getting 3 or 4 at bats. And there's huge variance obviously in the home runs, but at least you're getting your shots. With NBA, you can be dead in the water at minute 1 if if one of your bigger guys ends up sitting.
Especially like you play more GPP, but I mean if you play cash and there's someone with a 0 in your lineup, just say good night.
Oh yeah, no, 100%, absolutely 100%.
But so like you were saying last night, or a few nights ago with the Dallas game, I think it was when they were playing Orlando.
Yeah.
Me and my buddy were actually looking through the sheets. And we were looking at all the Vegas lines to see like who was projected to be high-scoring games, teams, whatever. And Dallas, Orlando were both 2 of the lowest total teams on the whole slate, and they're playing each other. So we were going to use, I think, like Justin Anderson was starting that night, and Seth Curry was supposed to like play the point and stuff. And we honestly were just like, you know what, the totals are just way too low for a GPP. We don't even want to mess with it. So we took those guys out and like tried to start over. And instead of going with like Justin Anderson or Barnes, we paid down at other spots and went up with Durant, and he had like 50-something points. So we love looking at totals for NBA. And for MLB, a lot of people know that I don't even look at Vegas because so much randomness can happen.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's really interesting. I had the opposite problem a couple nights ago where there was a massive line move in the Golden State game, and I had a game. I think it was the Golden State. I think it was Golden State Houston. I want to say, and I had a game stack set around that. I was really happy with it. And about an hour before lock, and it was the back end of a back-to-back for them. All of a sudden, the line moves down 6 points, and the line comes in, and I totally unwound everything, and it ended up being a huge mistake because the game ended up, I think it was like 126, 123 or something, and the guys that I had, I wouldn't have won a GPP, but I at least would have cashed, and I just pivoted somewhere completely different, and it ended up being garbage.
Well, one thing that I always do, and I actually wrote an article about it, is I always focus on the later games for NBA.
Yeah.
So there's a few reasons for that. You get games with West Coast offenses, so they're usually starting later. There's high pace and tempo. There's a lot more potential for turnovers, rebounds, and steals. There's less defense, and you're going to get lower ownership. So
yeah,
there's always benefits to going with the late games. And if you look on a nightly basis, the late games usually have 2 teams over 100, and the early ones usually only have 1 or none.
Oh, that's
so I usually try to stay with the late ones.
That's actually that's a really good strategy, and it inhibits one's ability to screenshot being in the lead of GPPs.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is one of my favorite like nice con dynamics. Look, I'm winning this NBA GPP. Great.
Yeah, and there's 3 minutes into the game.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So one thing that I asked you about before we came on, because we were just bullshitting, but when I'm looking at your lineups and you show me like when you have those big wins, right? So I'm showing one on the screen right now.
Yep.
You use one lineup and you just pick a couple of bigger GPPs. You're not taking 60 entries into the shot or anything like that. You're not doing a bunch of random, $5, $10, $25 GPPs. You're picking 1 or 2. You're sticking with them. You're putting in a lineup, and you're just going all in with it.
Yeah, I mean.
So would you like to comment on that and how a guy named Tommy G that most people know helped you develop that strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There are 2 elements there, right? There's how you're approaching lineup construction, and then how you're approaching contest selection. And For me, one of the things that I think has become imminently clear is that diversification in GPPs is a race to the middle. To the extent that you can make definitive choices in your lineups, figure out maybe where the chalk is going to be, and if you can find a good justification for moving away from it, do it. And and that comes down to another important lesson that I learned. You can't be afraid to play certain guys. If there's a guy that you're scared is boom or bust, you shouldn't be playing GPPs if you're not going to play them, because those are the guys that you want to roster. Like perfect example of that, and one of the reasons that I think I was able to take down that huge MLB win was rolling out Tyler Skaggs. At that point, he hadn't pitched a game in MLB in the majors in 3 years. But after doing some background investigation and reading some of the info sources that I like, he was lighting up the minors, and he ended up being a 7% owned guy that put up, I think he put up 35 points that night, had a bunch of strikeouts, and it gave me a completely different lineup construction than sort of what was chalky. And that's, it let me get in some other batters that I wanted, and it just gave me a totally different lineup construction than what was out there. Matt Kemp's, extra innings, extra base home run also helped, and then Duvall's back-to-back homers that night definitely helped also.
I'm pretty sure Duvall was like our top guy on the sheets that night.
I think he was, and there again, that was one of those. It was one of those calls where I was kind of looking at, what he had done in the past against whichever pitcher it was, and it wasn't great. And that was where I just, took total faith in the research that you guys were doing, and I forced myself into putting him in the lineup. And he was actually the last guy, and ironically, he's what led me to Rendon, who was my last plug, that I also wasn't super psyched about playing, but he ended up being, 0.3% owned that night and hit a homer. And that took me from middle of the pack to 28th in a 2,500 entry GPP. And that's where you make your money.
Yeah, man, I remember because you were giving us the play-by-play as it was happening. Me, you, and CG sitting in the chat all sweating it out together. That was
wild. It really was. That was really wild. And then, that a month later, I wasn't even. It's really funny. My number 2 and number 3 biggest wins, I didn't even sweat. Like the night that I won the 83 in NBA, I went to sleep before the Golden State game started. I think it was Golden State, New Orleans, and both Davis and Steph, and that was another perfect reflection where Steph had like 2 or 3 games in a row that were really bad. He was coming off his first game not making a 3-pointer in 152 games.
Right. Was that the night he set the record?
Yeah. And it was just perfect bounce back. And I went to sleep out of the money.
Oh,
I went to sleep out of the money and woke up to second in the Mega Monster.
Not too bad, huh?
Yeah, it was a good thing to wake up to. It was pretty funny, actually. Jeff Collins and Rad Thad gave me a lot of static for not sweating that one.
Well, you're not really gonna sweat if you're not even building up a sweat.
I know. It was the kind of thing. I went to bed and I looked at the lineup. At that point, I still had 4 guys to go, but the value guys had kind of hit. And I sort of said, oh, okay, this is I'm in a good spot. Like, this definitely could get me kind of top 10%. And I didn't think it was going to hit that hard. I mean, I actually didn't look at FanDuel. I looked at ESPN when I woke up, and the headline was, Steph sets record. I was like, oh, this might be
this might be a good night.
Yeah, it was pretty great.
All right, so let's get into a little bit of lineup construction.
Sure.
When you're building your lineups, do you go into it with any preconceived notion of like, all right, I want to go balanced or I want to go stars and scrubs? Do you start with, your value plays and then build up, or you do lock in your top, projected guys of the whole night and then try to find lineup around that?
So it's interesting. I think it varies. It varies across sports for me. Particularly with NBA, I think I have a lot of preconceived bias that I really try and get away from. So I'll build, I'll go in and just sort of blind build based on, sort of what I know. And then I'll look at, I'll look at sheets and other info sources to see really where the good matchups are and where I should be thinking about. And in building, the lineups, they tend to gravitate sort of naturally to stars and scrubs or more balanced. I mean, the challenge with NBA is, you have a lot of those kind of free squares on any given night, and it's really tough. It's really tough to fade those. I mean, that's similar to NFL. The challenge is it's really hard to get off of those guys. If you have a $3,000 guy that puts up 10x and you don't have him, there's no way you're even cashing, let alone getting into the top 1%.
I agree for sure. So how do you make the decision on if you want to play that quote unquote free square, the guy who's 3,500 coming into a lineup? Like, do you make sure it's someone who has been producing lately, or like someone, like tonight, like Saleh Mejri starting for Dallas or whatever?
Right.
Not that I would pick him, but like, what makes you, say like, all right, this guy's a free square I would lock in, or this is one that I'm contemplating fading?
Well, so my cardinal rule is I really, really try to not play guys who suck. And I know that sounds like a pretty simple thing, right? But, on the nights where, you have half the Phoenix starters sitting, rolling out a lineup that's got 3 or 4, bench scrubs who are starting is not necessarily the way to go. I mean, and it happens a lot. I mean, you see a ton of lineups with this stuff going on, and it just, so having said that, I really always want to make sure, especially on DraftKings, where I very admittedly have had far less success in NBA than I have on FanDuel. You have to play a guy that's going to get you at least 35 points. So, like a guy like Alex Len, I know from last season, that guy can go off for 40 or 45 points pretty easily. So when he's under 4K, he's kind of a lock.
Right.
And, but it's really tough. It's tough for me to roster guys that I know are going to be on the court for 35 minutes and just kind of running around playing defense. Cause that's not, even if it helps you get, some of the bigger studs in, it's not going to help your overall score. So if, in those situations where you have, I'm trying to think of a good example, like there was I think there was a night where everybody was gravitating towards one of the guys on the Spurs, and the way Pop runs those rotations, like you can have a guy who's starting and he can play for 15 minutes. And if everybody's on him, if you can figure out a reason to fade, that's where if that's gravitating towards stars and scrubs and I can figure out a reason to go balanced, that's what I would do.
So you were telling me earlier that you look for the ceiling a lot, especially in GPPs, and in basketball that's definitely important. But can you elaborate on why that's something you choose to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's sort of an extension of my general mentality, right? Like if you're gonna try and take down one of the large field GPPs, you're basically looking for all ceiling. I mean, you can get away with playing 1 or 2 guys who might be just sort of core 30 to 35 point guys, but you really need those. You need, especially in the value guys, you need those guys who are going to go off for 10x, and it lends itself to sort of my 1-2 lineup, entry structure. As I said, when you start trying to play all these different combinations, you're really just risking more capital to get to the middle, and the middle doesn't even cash in a GPP.
So when you're looking at players, do you do any kind of combinations like correlation combinations, like in football? We know for GPPs you want to try and pair wide receivers with your quarterback.
Sure.
But there are instances in NBA like that. Like tonight, I was talking with a guy from our team, Billy Deakins, and talking about Blake Griffin, and he's like, "Oh, you should pair Chris Paul with Blake Griffin because he gets the assist and throws up a lot of lobs." And personally, for me, I prefer just John Wall in general. At the same exact price, but there was certain validity to his statement of pairing them together is a pretty good viable strategy. So do you ever consider those kind of things when you're making your lineup?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it tends to drive strategy. So the night that I won just the regular monster and won the 31,000, I started out with the thesis that I sort of, no matter what, I wanted to play Giannis and Jabari Parker. And Parker tends to be one of those guys who, he's pretty boomer bust. But there's a good correlation between Giannis and Jabari, like getting a huge number of assists from Giannis to Jabari buckets. And, he ends up being one of those guys that goes lower owned. His price point for a Stars and Scrubs lineup is really tough because he's right in that sort of like mid-5 to, kind of mid-6 range. And it ended up winning me the GPP. Like, no question that foundation block is what I built the lineup off of. And it was a good night. Parker put it up, I think 45 FanDuel points to match Giannis at like 57 or 58.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's definitely a viable strategy when you're considering, the maximum upside of the lineup and, getting assists and the bucket at the same time. So those are things that correlate pretty well. Wait, hold on. Wanted to share.
And then in that same vein, if you like a particular pairing, you have to look on the other, to the other side of that game to see, where you're going to be getting points. Because if you're really going to crush it, you're going to have to get points from the other team. And it goes towards that sort of same dynamic of if you're playing a quarterback and a wide receiver, you want to look at a wide receiver from the other side because you're going to get positive correlation from both those guys scoring points.
That's a very good point there, and I definitely agree. And I did something like that a few nights ago. LeBron was ruled out, and it was a night that everybody was on Kyrie and Love.
That's exactly right. I don't think I ended up winning that night, but I tried to do the same thing.
Yep, and I went with Kyrie and Love, like everyone else. Like everyone knew, like those two were just basically a lock for the value. But on the other side of the ball, I was like, all right, well now LeBron can't guard Paul George. No one on that team can guard Paul George, and I used him, and he put up over 40 or something like that. So pairing those two together in the same game.
I love that move, and that's it's one of those things because you don't have the 5 days to do the work. You really have like 5-6 hours to do the NBA research. Everyone ends up doing that, right? Like, so LeBron sits and Kyrie ends up being 45% owned, right? And Kyrie's great. I mean, like he'll put up a ton of points, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to go there. And like that happens all the time in NBA. At least Kyrie is a talented guy, and when everyone goes there, it's like, I mean, going back to last year, it was like if what's his name? If Dirk was sitting and people are running to Dwight Powell, and I'm sure Dwight's a great guy, but like he's just not that great at basketball. And it's just tough. And then you're sitting there watching this guy, and he's going to get you like 18 points, and just is going to kind of do nothing. So the other looking back at that monster lineup, one of the things that I remembered, Westbrook was going to be hugely chalky that night. And it's one of those situations that highlights, I think, a really important sort of fundamental to getting to the tops of these ladders. You have to be able to envision scenarios where, normal things don't happen, right? I mean, there's a reason they play these games, and there's a reason that, 10-point underdogs win games. And so when I looked at it, I said, well, okay, what if Westy doesn't put up his standard triple double, and maybe gets a little bit shut down? Where could we go for points on OKC? And Oladipo has just been, I think criminally underpriced and criminally underutilized on that team, at least up until that point. And he's a really talented basketball player, and it was just a good spot to roster him as kind of a pivot off Westbrook. And there again, it ended up really working out.
I like that point, because I feel like that's something people underestimate a lot. And when it comes to basketball, it's completely different than football, because in football or baseball, like, those games can be very low scoring or very high scoring. Like in basketball, there's always at least a range of points that the outcome will have. So, there's going to be around 100 points scored for the team, on any given night. So somebody's going to be scoring those. Now, what happens if the guy who's 80% gets into early foul trouble?
Yeah, exactly.
What happens if Anthony Davis, you put him in, and he stubs his toe in warmups and doesn't play the rest of the game, and he's 50%. And so what happens to the rest of that game? And, if that person's on the bench, the other side of the ball may be able to score better. So you need to not only focus on, okay, what's the primary outcome, but what could happen if this happens, or, who's going to get the ball more if this guy gets out. So I think that's something that's very underlooked in DFS NBA.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it kind of extending off of that, if there's a guy in a good matchup, and this goes to your point of to some extent ignoring Vegas totals, Hassan Whiteside in a low total game is a guy who can still get you a double-double and is still going to put up 40 or 50 points, regardless of what Vegas thinks the total is going to be. There are going to be points scored in every game. You don't have to game stack a 179 total game, but if there's a guy in it that you like, that comes out of good statistical analysis and good sort of gut feel, you can't be afraid to play him. I mean, the kind of contravening my point earlier, I have a very clear remembrance last season. One of the guys, and it may have even been Max Dullery, he won a GPP, whatever it was, the entire Memphis starting line was out, and he just stacked the Memphis bench. And I mean, he won with like 4 guys from Memphis in a 172 total game. And,
wow.
It was because they each got 35 minutes, and it ended up being, kind of like a lukewarm scoring game. But, everyone had sort of 1 or 2 of them, but nobody stacked all 4 of them.
Right. And that's when guys like James Ennis and Jermichael.
Yeah. Exactly.
Green, I think.
Yeah.
When those guys start coming in and just cleaning up. But another thing that you mentioned about the the Whiteside thing and a low total, right?
Yep,
so the Vegas totals affect different types of players differently. So if you're in a low total, but that there are teams that shoot the ball a lot, that means they're going to be missing a lot. So there's going to be a lot of rebounds to go around.
Yeah,
so
that's a really good point.
Not be a lot of points scored. There is opportunity for a guy like Whiteside to just grab 15 to 20 rebounds in a night.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. And then when you have the guards, then you're looking for the points, assists, and steals and things of that nature. So it's definitely important to pay attention to Vegas, but you need to know why you're paying attention to it. And though things like that, aren't the obvious plays. And if you just go with, the the good plays that aren't obvious, that's a great way to be contrarian in general.
Absolutely. And I think it goes to another point. You got to look ahead in DFS. There are a lot of people who chase recency, and like the week that Julio, week 3, went off for 51 points, like he was way too highly owned the next week. And you just always have to be looking ahead, and it's tough. I mean, I caught JJ Nelson because I'd been watching him all season, basically last season, and I caught him on. I didn't win a lot of money because the rest of my lineup was not awesome, but I caught him on the 2 touchdown week because you look and you say, okay, Michael Floyd isn't doing much, and I think John Brown was even injured that week, and all of a sudden, like the $3,000 guy who's 3% owned goes off for 28 points, and 2 touchdowns and over 100 yards, and those are if you can catch those, that's what a real point of differentiation is, and it's where you win GPPs.
For sure. When people ask me, like, what do I look at for NBA and where do I start? The things that I basically tell them in general is look at the minutes, look at the usage, and look at things like the Vegas totals and pace of play. So those are like kind of the basics for me on a good place to start. Do you have anything else that like you would tell for new players that when they're looking towards their lineups, and since you're specifically GPP and people have problems with it, do you look for anything more than just minutes, usage, and pace? Is there anything else that you would say pay attention to?
Yeah, I look for guys like you who are looking at minutes, usage, and pace, and who are doing that work, because for a guy like me who's like, I'm not doing this full time. I really rely on the tools of great companies like yours to highlight those statistics that I'm just not. I'm not going to have the time to go out and do my own research on. And that's why it's really important. It really, honestly, your information sources are as important, if not more important, than the guys that that you're rolling out in your lineups. And you gotta stick with people, because just like the players, the guys like you they're gonna be hot, and they're gonna be weeks that aren't as good, and
sure.
You want to be around for the times that you guys get white hot. And that's what happened in baseball. I mean, you guys were setting the world on fire with the sheets. All June, July, and August were just it was nuts.
Insane. It was insane. I'm looking at a pretty nice sweat right now. If this Indiana Golden State game stays close.
Yeah, absolutely. There you go. You're doing a lot better. Oh, you played Steph tonight. You and I have very similar lineup construction tonight.
I stacked that entire game. So basically, I'll just go over like why I made this lineup. My partner CG, he made a dummy lineup earlier. He's like, "Oh, I'm just gonna stack the Golden State Indiana game," and I was like, "That's actually a really good idea." I liked it a lot. So I just went with the complete game stack.
Yep.
And he had Monte Ellis in there. And I didn't like it. I thought that I had enough usage out of Teague, Robinson, and Young.
Yep.
And so instead of going with Ellis, I went with Waiters because I knew he was playing. I saw that he's had multiple 30-point games in his last few, and he had like 100 family members in the crowd tonight playing.
Oh, that was a great call. See, I definitely didn't know that.
Yeah.
But I mean,
and then
like
down here I have
No, go ahead.
I went with Horford. It was his second game back from injury. I didn't think anyone would really be on him at that price when you have, Whiteside up there, and there was a couple good value plays today. And against Minnesota, I don't think they're very good against big men. So I took a leap of faith there with Horford, and he's doing okay to start. Waiting for him to come back in to get me some more points. But I need this game to stay hot. I need Indiana to get back in a little bit. Maybe their bench pick up the slack or something. But
Yeah. Oh man, that game is blowing out.
Yeah, for sure.
But you know what? Even in those blowouts, you know, and guys talk about this. Somebody's got to score the points to make it a blowout. And you know,
exactly.
Actually, this is.
And then look at that. I have 36 out of Draymond Green in the third quarter. I'm the only person who has him. Klay Thompson has 25 in the third. I'm the only person who has him. And then one other person has Steph Curry, and he's at 30.
Yeah.
So if that game stays close, it'll look real good for me.
So I'll send you over my my lineup because it's very funny. You and I took a very similar approach tonight. So I really liked, you know, and it's tough because you make these guesses, and you know, Indiana, they played in a big overtime game last night, and you know, you just got to take those chances though that maybe they're actually going to play it a little bit tight with Golden State. You know, they don't happen to be, but you know, your lineup's a great example of, you know, it's okay to play chalk as long as you're differentiated in other places, because you know, you have three guys that are 44+% owned, but then it's offset by guys in the by four guys in the single digits.
Oh, look, I have an even better example that I wanted to get to. So this is from last night, and I was just looking at it, and I just noticed that I had no idea how truly high owned my lineup was in a GPP, and I still almost won it. So look at this from last night. Right, so every single player is at least 40% owned except one. I have only one player who was low owned, Larry Nance.
Yep.
And he got 33.
Yeah,
look,
that's great.
Every single other player was very high owned. Everyone.
Oh man, wow, Westy was 85% owned. That is.
But look how crazy that is. That every single person in this lineup was very high owned except one, and I came in third.
That's all you need.
Yeah,
I mean that's really all you need. I tend, you know, look, I tend to, and you know, I tend to go. I try and be probably needlessly contrarian at times, but you know, like I don't know where this is going to end up, but at least I'm in the money now on. I played in the 444 on DK tonight. And this, even with the blowout, you know, Steph's got 40 points, Durant's got 44, but it's funny. You and I had very similar lineup constructions.
That's awesome. Yeah. So a couple of guys asked me if I could go over the lineup. So I'm going to go over the strategy I use and just tell people, and then maybe it'll help them for them. Actually, this lineup while I was at a wedding. So I did it. I didn't even have a lot of time. I just kind of knew where I wanted to go, and I got lucky with overtime. So look at this. This was the main lineup I made, and then I made another one and branched off of it with basically the same exact core. So this one, I knew I was locking in Westbrook, especially since Paul George was out. There's going to be no one on that team who could cover him, right? Jeff Teague. So I had a lineup where I was trying to fit in 5 Indiana guys, and it just wouldn't let me. And I didn't realize until after, but I was basically all in on them with Paul George out, because I thought the usage would be spread around everywhere. So
I think that highlights a really important point, right? You know, sometimes you got to play the chalk, right? You just, you know, especially in NBA, you know, like last night it was Westbrook, and then I think 2 nights before that it was Harden. And like you just have to, you gotta you gotta put on your helmet, play the guy that you think is going to be 85% owned, and differentiate elsewhere. But at the same time, that also means you can't put in a lineup that sucks, right?
Right.
Like you said you tried to force in 5 Indiana guys and it didn't work, so you got to go elsewhere. Yeah,
for sure. And the way I was thinking was, all right, I'm gonna load this up. I knew Glenn Robinson was starting at 3,500, so I plugged him in. I loved Thaddeus Young, And then Miles Turner for me, I just thought he was underpriced, especially with Paul out. So I locked all those guys in. I went Westbrook and put Oladipo as my shooting guard because, like you said earlier, he's been so underpriced, and you know, it's just crazy that he consistently puts up around 30. And then for me, it was just straight lock in Jimmy Butler. Don't think twice about it. Playing the Lakers, they've been very competitive lately. So it was a definite good spot if they were able to keep the game close. Dwayne Wade was out. Rondo was questionable. So for me, it was just lock him in, and he's going to have insane usage.
I'll tell you something. So Butler's one of those guys that can get you. He can get you 75 points on a night, and he's just one of those guys that I think he plays at an elite level, and he's definitely getting to be higher owned. I'm a total mark for Rondo. I can't tell you how many nights I played him last year. and he, it's interesting. He's another guy. At some point, he's going to win. He's going to win somebody a GPP on, where you play like a Butler Rondo pairing, because he's like, his assist numbers are still off the charts. And I think the last price I saw him at was like 5,500. I mean, he could easily put up 10x that. And that's that's where you just got to find the right spot and hope it works out.
For sure, man. Like that's what's crazy about it, is like you can play absolute chalk as long as you just have like one person differentiating. Yeah, like that's what's crazy about it. And I agree with Rondo. His price is around 5,500. He's just been playing at such a good pace. He just isn't scoring. Jimmy Butler, the problem that I've seen there at least is, you'll have guys like Taj Gibson who's going to get a rebound, put it back up. You have a guy like Mirotic who's going to sit in the corner and wait for a three. Then you have Jimmy Butler who can create his own shot. So his upside, I believe, is limited, but for that price and the expectation that he can hit 30 on almost any given night is definitely reason to play him. If you think that he's going to be better than someone like, Jeff Teague, who's been in the mid 6Ks underpriced.
No, and it goes to another point, and something that I use as kind of foundation in MLB, and you'll get, there's like a total religious battle, I think, amongst sort of the quant guys and sort of the feel guys in DFS about this. But I firmly believe in streaks. And when I built that MLB lineup that took down the 179, one of the rules that I use, and I use this, actually, you and I could have a longer conversation about whether or not this is gambling, but I don't really gamble anymore. This is the only thing that I do. But one of the cardinal philosophies I would have is that anything in a set of 3, I had to look at as a streak. Because you can go broke trying to buck trends, and whereas if you play with it, you're just gonna make money. And so when I was looking at trying to decide who, like especially value guys in baseball, if there was a guy that hadn't had a hit in 3 games, I just wouldn't play him. And sometimes those guys surprise me and they'd hit a home run, but like I'd much rather have a guy that had 1 hit, that had hits in 3 consecutive games. And even if maybe his upside was a little bit capped, because at least I know I'm going to get some points there, right?
I love streaks. I go by that heavy. So I definitely agree, especially in MLB and NBA.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like Teague tonight. I mean, Teague played 40 minutes last night, and they're through the end of the third. He's got 27 DK points. That's fine. Like, I'll take that. If he gets me to 35. What's that?
Said I just saw he's questionable to return. He like rolled his ankle or something.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that about fits my last 48 hours. It started Saturday night with NBA, where I junked up my Golden State lineup, and then AJ Shady go down, and like,
oh man,
I can't get away from the injuries. At least he put up 27 points. I mean, That'll at least maybe save me, but you know.
That happened to my boy. He had AJ and LaShawn, and he cashed in a GPP. So
see, that's the worst. I was so happy to be at the bottom of the ladder because it just if you know if I had cashed with a 0, I just would have been heartbroken because it would have meant that I should have been way further up.
I just wanted to do a little product plug while we're at it. Talking about this concept of streaks, because we actually built something into our sheets that helps you to understand who's on streaks and who's trending in certain ways.
Oh, that's awesome.
So check this out to show everybody. So what we have is built in is these 3 right here. Okay, so these are trends. And this is who's hot, minutes watched, and fantasy points per minute. So we check these out like fantasy point average. Okay, so over the last 10 games played, these players average this per game. So over 10 games, this is what they average per game for fantasy points. Now over the last 3, this is what they average. So we find the difference here, and you could see who's trending compared to what they're not season average, because we feel like that takes too many games into account, but the 10 game gives a very nice base of how they perform against, the league, because I think it takes enough matchups into account that this is kind of like where they would be over the course of the season, but it doesn't take the whole season into account. But this is the difference. So when you sort this, it shows you who's been the hottest lately in terms of like trending for fantasy points, right? So like Teague over 10 games averages 34, but over the last 3 has been averaging 43. So at this salary, that's just a joke for what his performance has been, right? So same thing with Tony Parker, but like look, Clint Capella and Frank Kaminsky. Capella has been averaging 7 points more than his average, and Kaminsky has been averaging 7 points. So for these prices, those are good players to keep an eye on.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you do the same with the minutes, right? So this is how many minutes they've been averaging over the last 10, and this is over the last 3. So I think this is the most important to see who's getting, more minutes. So you could see here, like Robinson, he was averaging 15 over the last 3. It's 23.
Yep.
Then these 3 guys like Richardson, Turner, and Young, Paul George has been out. So it shows you that they've got an increase in minutes over the last few games. So this is something I look at every day to see who's getting more opportunity.
And that's right? what NBA is all about. It's really about opportunity.
For sure.
People, guys in the industry talk a lot about opportunity and talent. And it's really important.
And keep in mind, like someone like this, like CJ Watson, he's had a nice boost in 5 minutes per game over the last 3.
Right.
But 11 to 17 isn't something to be excited about.
Exactly right.
But Chris Paul, for someone who plays as much as he does and is as involved, he gets 3 minutes more per game over his last 3. But what we've seen is that the more minutes he played didn't equal more fantasy production.
Yeah.
It actually was less fantasy points per minute. So the extra minutes in those last 3 games didn't actually benefit him, which is very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
So these are just some things that we really pay attention to on like a daily basis.
No, you're
like Josh.
The data analytics that you guys are doing is super impressive. It definitely transcends any sort of statistical analysis that I do on my own.
Yeah, thanks, man. Well, like for us, NBA is like kind of pretty basic in terms of what you want to look at, right? So, like these guys, like I try to stay away from bad over-unders and stuff like that.
Yep.
And bad totals. But for the most part, like if you just pick on like high total games and stuff like that, like you definitely have a chance to extrapolate points that might not have already been in your initial thought process.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
So, all right, man. I want to thank you very much for coming on and It was
Absolutely,
awesome.
man. This was fun.
Yeah, we'd love to do this more often. We're both very busy, and I usually work at night. I just happen to have the night off today, which is great.
Sure.
But yeah, man. So I would love for you to come on more often when we can. This was great. I think we got a lot done and a lot talked about, and these are conversations that could go on for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm here and available whenever you guys want to chat. I definitely owe some thanks on the MLB front to you guys and you guys in NBA and I have to mention the guys at Guru Elite. Their NBA product is awesome and has definitely helped me take down those GPPs.
For sure. So that's at Tommy G and Fantasy Guru Elite. Those guys are great over there. They're very knowledgeable. You got Jeff Collins, Rad Thad, Tommy G. So there's some very knowledgeable guys there, and they know what they're doing. So I have no problem shouting them out as well. So guys, this is Zach at Brother Cherry on Twitter. That's at Brother Cherry. You can look on my Twitter.
I'm Amateur Hour on. Oh, sorry, Ben.
What was that?
I'm Amateur Hour, Amateur HR on DK and Amateur Night on FanDuel.
So if you see those, stay away from him. But he usually plays GPP, so just know that you're fighting for second when you see him in the contest.
All right, thanks, Benji. Great seeing you, man.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having. Thanks for
Cheers.
coming on with us, brother.
Yeah, no worries.